Rich and I apparently are looking at different bills. This is not an FDR-style bill. It is not a public takeover of health care. It is not socialism. It does not have, as Ezra said, a public option. It is basically a marriage between Mitt Romney's Massachusetts Care and, even more, the John Chafee, Dave Dernberger, Chuck Grassley, Bob Dole alternative of 1993-94, built around managed competition. It takes a very long time to get 31 million out of the 47 or 48 million uninsured actually insured. It moves in small steps, even on what I would criticize on the cost control side, but it leaves the basic system in place and works towards exchanges to try and build an insurance market. I mean, if this is FDR style, I think FDR would say, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Let me add to what Norm said here, because I think we have a tendency to have these very political conversations that are totally unleavened by the policy here. One thing on salami slicing healthcare reform. We did S-chip. We've done a lot of little salami slices in the past 10, 15 years. And the problem is actually worse, right? If you look at S-chip, you look at our expansions, we can't expand fast enough to deal with the problem, and to deal with the problem of the uninsured or the problem of cost. And Norm is right. The most compelling policy critique you can do of this bill is it doesn't do enough. We're going to cover 2/3 of the uninsured. We're going to make a dent on the cost problem, a beginning on the cost problem. The bill will only really affect people who are on the individual market or the small business market. And at the end of the day, we're going to be spending 4% of what our national healthcare spending a year on this bill. The big lie of the bill is that it's so big. It just isn't. But we in Washington and Congress in general are unused to doing big things. And so we're looking on the one hand at them doing something much larger than they normally do. And on the other hand, we're having a very tough time communicating the scale of this problem. So it is much bigger. Clinton's plan actually would have been a solution. Give him that credit. This is a start on a solution. It is a step. It is a salami slice on some level.
What Rich is right about is the aspiration of the Democratic Party, because, and Ezra's right at the same time, and Norm about the size of what this thing actually is. But remember, Nancy Pelosi came on our network at MSNBC and said to Rachel Maddow just the other day, we're going to provide health care for all Americans. That is a lie. From the first day, they gave up the idea of universal coverage, which was the Clinton battle cry. And from the first day, the committees were toying with, do we leave out 15 million people? Do we leave out 20? One committee was going to leave out 30 million people. And so the thing deals with roughly half of the problem
and
of the uninsured.
And the president never promised universal
but
coverage.
The language remains, as Rich says, from the Democratic side, extremely aspirational. It's the kind of language that if you were actually doing that, we would build a statue to you when you got it done. And, you know, in '94, we all wanted the statue built for getting universal coverage. These people are going for something much smaller, but running into just as much of a heavy lift.
I know when Lawrence O'Donnell has to defend me, I'm in real trouble. This is the left most plausible bill they could get. Sure, it could have been bigger, it could have had a public option, but they couldn't get that through Congress, even with their own Democrats.
So anybody who argues that the president should have done what Ezra suggested and come out at the beginning with his plan, which included a public auction, could have never gotten it through Congress.
This is the biggest bill they can get through, and they may not, even this, they may not be able to get through.
Just stop on that point one second. Does everybody agree that this is the biggest bill they could have gotten through?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Ezra, is it the biggest bill?
You could have started bigger and compromised down to this, but this is the biggest thing.
You may have been able to do that. I just want to be real clear that this was the point of my earlier comment, not that they could get a bigger bill through. Who knows? You could have tried something in reconciliation to Medicare for all, but you would have failed. Just so that we shouldn't mix up the political constraints and the policy problem. That we just need to be clear which one we're talking about at which point. I agree it's the biggest bill they probably can get through. That's why they're there. On the other hand, we should just be clear on what it does and doesn't do.
We're at about $20 billion a year, projected to grow at 8% a year. Over the first full 10 years of implementation, it's probably about $2 trillion. It is a big deal, and that's why it's a big argument in our politics. I want to return the favor, or the disfavor, and agree with Lawrence. I think the reason Democrats are doing this fundamentally is because they have a moral passion for covering the uninsured. And that's a very admirable impulse. But that is why they are doing this. the supposed cost control, the supposed deficit reduction. They don't have a passion for that. That's not what this is about. But in this political moment and in this political environment, that's what the salesmanship has had to center around.
Well,
and in that disconnect, there's been a big problem.
There's another peculiar thing that's unique to healthcare
Come right to you, Norm, I
legislation.
promise. Yeah.
And it goes to a point Norm made. Norm said that this bill is, in effect, and it is very close to, the Republican alternative bill of 1993-1994. That bill was abandoned by Republicans in 1994 because uniquely in healthcare legislation, especially for Republicans, the ground moves underneath you. And the Republicans change, because the Republicans don't have their hearts in this. They kind of look at it differently, and Bob Dole abandoned that bill very quickly. John Chafee, whose bill it was, eventually abandoned his own bill. It was hopeless. It never had more than 4 Republicans in the Senate who were in favor of it. And so that's part of what's happened this year, too, is that the Republicans will always, it's part of it, they will always be moving away from wherever the Democrats are, and they'll always be dragging them toward a more conservative bill.
Norm.
Yeah, let me just say, Rich is right at one level. They certainly want to cover the uninsured, but it's also important to realize, and Ezra has written a lot of very good stuff on this. When you want to deal with things like pre-existing conditions, when you want to try and take away some of the issues that everybody that has insurance have to deal with, you cannot do it without expanding the risk pool. And that's where you start to move. You know, a lot of Republicans have been saying, why don't we just take away pre-existing conditions? Do that, and everybody in the marketplace is going to find their costs going up dramatically because it can't be done without taking some of these other steps. You start down a path where the notion of a salami slice that is a narrow one simply can't work. And, you know, the Republicans have said, well, we'll just have a national exchange. People can buy insurance anywhere. That's like what we did with credit cards at their urging, which is everybody goes to South Dakota and creates plans that are disastrous for consumers. So you've got to build in a set of regulations. When you start down a path of dealing with this problem, you end up building a lot of different components. And this is much more than simply covering the uninsured. And I should note that, you know, the reason we aren't covering most of the other uninsured is because nobody is willing to step forward and cover illegal immigrants and aliens.
Norm,
that's the lion's share of them.
Could someone with Lyndon Johnson's political skills and congressional skills have gotten this bill through?
You know, Charlie, I think we don't have a Lyndon Johnson around today, but we don't have a culture or a Senate or a House that are like we had in the 1960s. We didn't have a Sean Hannity back then, or a Glenn Beck, or a Rush Limbaugh.
You know, Lyndon Johnson lived in an incredibly easy political world at the time. There are a couple of conditions you have to remember. There were no campaign finance laws. Most campaign contributions were bags of cash, literally, okay? So the guy from Louisiana might not have been as good at getting bags of cash as someone else in the party might have been. So there were none. You were much more dependent in many ways on fundraising on the party. The other thing, there was no budget act. Do you know what CBO said Medicare would cost? Nothing, because there was no CBO. Nobody cared what it would cost. When Lyndon Johnson got estimates about what it would cost, he said, hide those, don't tell anybody, those are too high. So in that world, yeah, I think Lyndon Johnson could get Medicare passed. Could Lyndon Johnson get this passed today? He would have absolutely no additional skills to bring to it that Barack Obama didn't already bring to it.
Fair enough, but that